Hello and welcome to Creative Connections. I'm your host, Gary Blanchard, and today my guest is a poet, editor, artist, writer, Carol Mays, and in full disclosure, I will say that she is also my wife. Carol, welcome.
Thank you.
So I came to know you actually first through your writing, which really impressed me. How did your interest in writing develop?
It happened suddenly when I was about 30. All of a sudden I had some issues I was dealing with, and I decided to write about them in form of poetry mostly. And I've been writing poetry ever since, really. As you can see, that was many years ago that I had that transformation. But I'm still writing poetry, and I've written a number of poetry books and also other books that are not poetry.
Okay.
And I've actually brought some of them to show.
Okay, we'll get to those in just a few minutes. I wanted to ask you, because a lot of your book, you write wonderful poems, and I don't say that simply because I'm married to you, but you also include a lot of classic poems in your books. Mm-hmm. What do you look for in a poem?
What I really enjoy in a poem when I read one is conciseness and intensity and positivity, which among today's modern poets seems hard to find. And I also try to uplift whoever reads the poems. So I'm trying to uplift people. I'm trying to bring something beautiful. I'm trying to bring something that transcends the boring routines of daily life, something that expands people's horizons to a broader, deeper perspective on life. And I look for that in another poet as well.
Okay, and who are some of the poets that you particularly like?
Oh, I love Edgar Allan Poe, and some people don't realize that he was a great poet as well as a short story writer. But I love his poems. And there's also a poet from Canada. I'm trying to think of his full name. I think it's William Wilfred Campbell, who wrote about 100 years ago. And his poems are very, very moving, and hardly anyone has ever heard of this poet.
How did you discover these poets?
Just by the process of reading poetry books. You know, you would buy a whole book, and there might be one or two poems in there that you really enjoyed, that you really thought were well written, and so you look to see who the author was, and then you look them up online and to see what other works you can find by this particular writer. And that's basically how I discovered. Also, Lucy Maud Montgomery. I have a lot of her poems in two of my books. This one and another one that I didn't bring in, Uplifting Poems. Okay,
and why don't you brought some of your books with you, and why don't we start with Mystical Poems? Let's look at the cover. You can hold that up so people can see it. And tell me about that book.
Well, it's a long story, but basically I met two other poets who wrote along similar themes, Nina Anderson and Richard Bechtold. And Richard unfortunately passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. But before that happened, he got together with Nina and I, and we put together this book. It's very moving and beautiful. Some of the chapters: connections to nature, identities and relationships, time and eternity, visions, dreams, and fantasies. Just really beautiful.
And one thing that really impressed me was that it would be so tempting to group the poems by poet in the book, and instead you decided to go with themes and group them according to the themes and mix them together, which really does work well.
It was uncanny the way they just kind of wove themselves into a whole piece.
Yeah, I would say that you three really sort of complemented one another in that. So what the other book you have is a collection of uplifting poems?
This is the second to the most recent book, a collection of uplifting poems. And these have many poets represented in here, including Emily Dickinson, this fellow I just mentioned, if I can find him again. Well, Lucy Maud Montgomery, as I mentioned, is in here. Longfellow, some of Longfellow's poems. There's about 18 poets represented in this book, and it's all on the subject of peace, magic, fantasy, connections to nature, connections to meaning in life. It's all, beautiful.
Great, great.
Stuff.
And then the third paperback that you brought is a holiday that I think is rather dear to you.
Halloween. I love Halloween. This is Haunting Poems and Stories, and again, it has poems from Poe, actually there's one here by my mom, Florence Ritzer, one by John Greenleaf Whittier. I've put some of my own poems in here, as I did in that one as well. And I also took a story from Hawthorne and edited it for a modern audience, because it was difficult to get through it. And I looked up many of the old-fashioned old-fashioned language, and updated it for a modern audience. It's called Feathertop. And then there's another story in here by Mikhail Lermontov, an influential Russian poet and novelist. So it's partly stories and partly poems.
That's wonderful. Now, if people are interested in your books, how can they find them?
They're all available on Amazon. I believe they're also available on my website, celestialdreams.net. Now, these books are the same as these, but I've made ornamental versions of them.
Okay.
I had the paperback made into hardcover, and I've embellished them with fabric. Actually, that's roofing tile, little wooden pieces. This is actually this book, a collection of uplifting poems that I've also embellished.
That's really fascinating. Where did you get the idea to do that?
It just came to me one day. I mean, I've been working for years on doing something like this, and it finally hit me exactly what to do. So it was a very involved project.
Okay. And it doesn't show as well on the camera, but these covers are three-dimensional, most of them. And they have a three-dimensional quality that really makes the images on there stand out. Very, very beautiful. Now, those are not available on Amazon.
No, those are the handmade ones are not available on Amazon, but if you go to my website, celestialdreams.net, there's information there on how you can contact me if you would like one of these books. I'm not going to be making them anymore. I only have about 15 or 20 left, and it takes too long to make them, and they're very expensive to make, and I think I'm giving up that project. But
okay,
if you want one in the meantime.
We right now are seeing some very good images of those books. Thanks very much, Stanley, for getting us a good picture of those. And, so these are limited editions.
Right.
So I absolutely urge you, if you want one, to get one while you can, because they will not be around very long. Now, another project that you worked on recently was a DVD that combines poetry, music, and visual images. What inspired you to do that?
Well, you, of course, because I had seen I had seen your video, your DVD, and I said, I wonder if I could do something like that. And you helped me with the technology of it, and I was able to complete it. Poems of Enchantment. This takes 18 poems out of this book, and as Gary said, sets them to music and gorgeous visual images that I found online. I combine them all with music that I composed, and it's very relaxing, beautiful. Has a lot of romantic scenes in it, scenes from the forest, the sea, the city at night, the airport. Some people wouldn't consider that very romantic anymore, but it'll take you away from the daily grind, basically.
Okay, so we're going.
Excuse me, that's also available on Amazon.
Okay, that's great. We're going to see a couple of the videos from that DVD, and we'll be looking at those, and then Carol and I will come back to talking about these.
Somewhere in an old-growth forest, a woman smoothly moves amid shadows of the pines and hardwoods. Her mossy gown is verdant green, her hair twinkles with mica, and her soul is deep as a midnight sky with remote star clusters beaming. She tends the ruins of an ancient inn in a bed of ferns and roses. Many a nomad passing through is revived by her grace and goodness. Though we can't lay hands on her, she wanders free within our grasp. For the ancient inn beguiles us still in the labyrinths of our minds. Along the line of the smoky hills, the crimson forest stands. And all the day the blue jay calls throughout the autumn lands. Now by the brook, the maple leans with all his glories spread. And all the sumacs on the hills have turned their green to red. Now by great marshes wrapped in mist, or past some river's mouth, throughout the long, still autumn day, wild birds are flying south.
So, how did you come up with the music and the images to fit the poems?
Well, it was fairly easy to find the images because I didn't have to, take the photographs myself. I didn't have to do the videos myself. I just found them online. I found websites that sold these to the public. So I just typed in a search word, and it actually took a while to find the exact image that I wanted, but I did find some beautiful ones. The music, however, it was a long process of learning the different sounds on the keyboard, learning the rhythm that I wanted to create, and recording it. So that was very involved, but I just tried to get into the mood of the poem and create a rhythm and chord patterns that would augment the poem.
You really did an amazing job with that. I was greatly impressed by how much the music really enhanced the poetry without taking away from it, and that's really an art. A lot of times you'll see perhaps a movie or a TV show where the music seems to overpower the program and give all the wrong feel. But in the videos that we just saw and the videos that are on here, you did an amazing job at getting those to sync up.
Well, it wasn't only me. You remember the fellow who did the produced the sound?
Right.
We should mention him, shouldn't we?
Yes. His name is, he goes by the name of Outra Lights, and he is actually based outside of Detroit.
Outra Light, is that O-U-T-R-E, I think?
Yes,
yeah,
O-U-T-R-E. And he does amazing music production and really brings out the best in musical projects. So we want to thank him as well. So when you are writing a poem, how do you know when it's finished?
Well, you have like feelings. For me, it's a complicated process because it starts out as a stream of consciousness. But then when you wake up the next day and you look at it, you say, well, you know, a 5-year-old could have written this. It's a stream of very simple, pure stream of consciousness. So then you have to fashion it into something for adults, which is the hard part. Making the meters work, making the words work. And then actually I'm obsessive about it, so eventually I end up looking up every word in the thesaurus and picking the best possible word in the English language. So I work on these things for years. But after you do this a number of times, one day you say, okay, that's as good as it's going to get. I've completed it. It's a polished gem, and I'm not going to mess with it any further. But sometimes when you get to the point where you've looked every word up, you say, well, now I've taken some of the life out of it. So then you have to put life back into it. So it's a very long, layered process for me. And a lot of poets don't do that, but for me, it's a very long process. But I've had some poems I've worked on for 10, 20 years, you know.
I remember there were some poems. The book you had out when we first met was called The Lost Art of Living Happily. And it was a book about how to live a happy life. But also it had some of your poetry in it. And what I do remember is that there were poems in there that are in the Uplifting Poems book, but they are very different from what they were when I first read them 25 years ago. And I would have to say that I thought that they were excellent poems when I read them, but I would also have to say that you know, the work on them, I think you're right, you have not taken the life out of them by working on them so much. And I think that's a really delicate balance to make. So you're still writing?
Not as often as I used to, but occasionally.
Okay. What inspires you to write?
If I feel that at some point in my activity for that day, some deeper intuition has come to me about some subject, some meaningful subject, that I feel I want to express, that it's worth really polishing and expressing, then I'll start the process. And as I say, at first, I'm very moved by whatever it is that has reached me, and I'll just immediately write everything down while I'm still fresh in the moment.
Okay.
But then, as I say, it's a long process to perfect it.
All right. A poem I can think of right off, and it's probably in your Halloween book, is the one about the Halloween pin.
Oh, yeah. I probably have that in here.
Yeah. Carol and I had gone to a coffee shop, and it was right around Halloween time, and the waitress had on this pin, and Carol saw that pin, and it just really grabbed her, and this poem came out from it. Would you mind reading it to us?
Sure. A magical Halloween pin. As Halloween approached, a middle-aged redhead working in a coffee shop boldly wore a spider pin. It had a massive body of ruby-colored glass and was, in subdued lighting, as striking as her smile. In that one adornment of childlike abandon, she loaned me a key to a fluid dimension, a sweet hidden wellspring, expansive when tapped, of all possibilities, where young may be old and old may be young, wherein the mortals struggle against prosaic prudence and tired perspectives, bewitchment can prevail. A phoenix from ashes, in magical resiliency, wondrous, warm, and winking.
That is so wonderful. Thank you. Also, I was wondering if you would like to maybe share a couple of poems from the Mystical Poems book that you particularly like, either yours or someone else's.
Well, I haven't asked Nina if I could share any of her poems, as she has some beautiful ones in here. Well, I guess I'll find a couple of mine. Let's see. This is called In the Beginning. A light has always been glowing close to the heart of the universe. Over the course of time and evolution, we as mortals have lived in fragile transience. Yet, flickering in the soul is the sublime primordial sparkle. In this ember born of the primal fire, the transient contains the immortal, and the infinite caresses the finite. Through the morass of earthly chaos, the crystal beacon shines, and its power has not been extinguished.
Beautiful. And that's one I do remember from way back.
I guess Richard wouldn't mind if I read one of his.
Okay.
It's called Little Oak Tree. Little oak tree hidden in the deep, dead brown grass by the side of the abandoned road, speak to me again of life. Let me hear your singular passionate voice embraced by the dancing wind. Tell me again of your necessary, unforgotten ancient secrets. Talk to me of your green dream, of seed birth, silent growth struggle, and faithful forever hope, rooted in future acorn seedlings, all remembered wisdom, gifting the new evolving landscape. Isn't that beautiful?
It really is. And again, as I say, what really amazed me was how the work that you, Nina, and Richard were doing just so blended so well. And it was just wonderful to see three artists get together and to cooperate on a project like that. So you have been writing for a good while. You are winding up work on these embellished books. So what's next for you artistically?
Well, believe it or not, I think it's painting rocks.
Okay.
I have recently discovered that it's a craze, I think throughout the country and maybe internationally. And what appeals to me about it is being able to create something beautiful very simply on a rock and hiding it somewhere or putting it somewhere where somebody's bound to run across it, and it'll uplift their day. It's like they'll find some magic in their day just by discovering this rock. So I think it's going to be an easy project compared to, goodness knows, compared to these, and it'll be rewarding. And you can, if you want, you can put little inspiring sayings on them. And they've had a couple of sessions at the library in West Brookfield. The kids are getting into it too, so it's pretty exciting. It's like a new idea that's really. And usually I'm trying to do something that nobody else is doing, but this time I'm doing something that a lot of people are doing.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's something that's really worth doing, and something that, as you say, the surprise of coming across a painted rock somewhere could really make a difference in somebody's day. I remember I had an office where I had the rocks that have little words etched into them, and it was very hard to keep that basket filled because people loved them so much that they tended to take them with them, and but that's I think the magic of the painted rocks is that people may decide to leave it there for someone else to discover, and that spreads some magic. But on the other hand, maybe the person who comes by that's exactly what they need at that moment. And it touches their heart, and it opens something in them. And, you know, that is a great thing to be able to do. And it sounds easy to say, you know, oh, you can get rocks everywhere. But I imagine not every rock is a good candidate for that process.
Yeah, usually you look for smooth rocks, round rocks.
Okay. All right. So, again, if people are looking for your books or the DVD, where would they go to?
They would go to Amazon.com or to celestialdreams.net.
Okay. Now, is there a question that you wish I would have asked?
Well, speaking of the rocks, a thought just came to me. One of the reasons it appeals to me is because there were two very magical events that happened in my childhood. One was when my extended family came over and we went out into the forest at night, and it just seemed so magical to me because my nuclear family had never done anything like that, so it was just incredibly magical. The other was when I was about 3 or 4 years old. I was living in a major city at that point, and I was out playing in the dirt in the yard, and I came across these beads. You know, now looking at it back on it, I'm sure it was just somebody's broken necklace, and it was just a cheap necklace. But to me as a child, you know, it was this most magical thing just to find these beads in the dirt, you know. And so maybe that's what's motivating me now to do the rock project.
And you know, I think that the experiences we have as children really do play a large role in the person that we become. And it sounds like perhaps if you could give that sense of magic to someone else, it would be, you know, because what I gather from everything you do and say is that this is more than just being artistic. This is communicating for you and sharing something that's important to you.
Because we get so stuck in the daily routines and in all the worries and trials of daily existence. I think we need to stand back and see a broader picture, see a deeper picture, and see the magic in life. And it's hard to do these days because there's so much stress and there's so much artificiality everywhere. It's very difficult. What should be so natural and easy becomes difficult. So I keep trying to bring this broader worldview to people, this more magical worldview to people.
And I would say that, you know, as our society gets more and more complicated, we really do need that. So I, on behalf of society, would like to thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
So thank you again for joining us for Creative Connections, and we will be seeing you soon. If you have anybody you would like to see as a guest on the show, feel free to contact me at garyblanchard@hughes.net, and I will see if I can get the person you would like to see on as a guest. And thank you, and we'll see you again soon.